Well, Erin Hupp, welcome to the Means Show. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, it's so cool to see you there in your studio. Very cool. I would love to, if you could just introduce yourself and let us know, let listeners know where you're located and just a little brief bit of information about what you do.
So, I am a ceramicist in Oakland, California, and I work mainly with restaurants or interior designers to create sort of commissioned custom pieces for a specific space. So, my design process is very site specific and intensive, and I come up with various prototypes. I go to the restaurant or I go to a home or a hotel, and everything is very intentional and made for that space. And it's a really lovely way because it involves a lot of collaboration. It's a lovely way to make art.
It sounds really interesting and like sort of unique to what people usually expect when you say you're a ceramicist. I think people expect you sell to people, like sell directly to people like retail or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. So and I started out like that. And when I first started making things on the wheel, or what we call throwing on the wheel, I worked at a production studio. And so it was very much the standard form of, here are the items that we have. We made them already. They're in stock. You decide what you want and we'll ship them. And I was sort of like a assistant studio manager. I mixed the glazes, and I learned to production throw, which means making the same thing over and over and over again. And then we would put it up on a website and offer it. And the way I've now found my little niche and done my business now is a lot different. It's very hands-on and collaborative, and it feels more like two artists working together. So a chef being the other artist or an interior designer being the other artist. Sometimes I work directly with homeowners for a vision that they have. And it's a whole lot of fun.
Well, I have to say I feel envious of you when you're talking about it because my what I do, I'm always alone. Like it's like a very solitary thing, and I've always sort of dreamed of having a collaborator. So the fact that you get to collaborate all the time is really, it sounds really awesome. I'm sure there's give and take always, but before we get too far down into, what you do, and I definitely want to talk a lot more about it. I just would love to hear a little bit about where you're from, like where you grew up, how you ended up in the Bay Area, just sort of your life journey, sort of Reader's Digest version, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. So I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, on the shores of Lake Michigan, and I went to school for undergrad for college in Madison, Wisconsin, which is sort of on a peninsula. And I can probably track all of my formative. I like trying to describe it like this. I can track all of my formative places that I've lived by the fact that they've been adjacent to water. So I grew up on the shores of Lake Michigan. And then I went to college in an isthmus. This sort of, I guess law school was formative and it was in Chapel Hill, but we went out to the beaches a lot along the coast in North Carolina, like Ocracoke Island. And so water was still nearby. And actually, right before law school, I lived in Sydney, Australia for a little bit. And then after law school, I came here to California, and I've lived here since 2007, 2008.
Okay,
Um,
wow.
yeah. And at first, as a lawyer, I came here to practice law.
Yeah, so I know we talked about that a little bit at that wonderful event at Hilda and Jesse. And there's going to be an article in Forbes that I'm writing coming up about that. So stay tuned. Um, but yeah, I'd love to hear about your transition from what you used to do to what you do now. It's so different. I'd love to hear more about that. Could you just describe what you were doing and your evolution to transitioning into what you do now?
Absolutely. So, like I said, a long time ago, over 20 years ago, I learned to do ceramics on the wheel when I was an undergrad in Madison, Wisconsin. And so it's always been this golden thread, but it's always been sidelined as a hobby. I've been doing it off and on since then. think the longest I've ever taken a break is maybe a year or two. And that's through law school, through my first career as an attorney when I worked on land use, municipal, and environmental law.
Was that in
And
the Bay
then,
Area
yeah,
also?
that was in the Bay Area. My first 4 or 5 years was at a larger firm called Myers Nabe in Oakland. And so they're smaller cities can't handle all of their legal issues in house. So they'll have a city attorney, but then they farm out a lot of their specialty legal issues to a firm, and that's the kind of firm that I worked at. And it was a great job, and I was very happy there. We moved to London for a year. So when I came back from living in London for a year, I reached out to a nonprofit that focuses on child welfare law, and that's where I pivoted to. And it's the nonprofit is named Advokids, and we would help. And it's based in Marin, but it services all of California. And the best way to describe it is we would help the worst cases in sort of in foster care, child welfare court. So not custody cases, but instead cases like how do we get information to the judge so that they can make the right decision for the child? A lot of filing paperwork. Who knew I loved doing that so much? And helping whoever's taking care of the child in that moment. Is that a foster parent? Is it a grandma, a grandpa, an aunt, or an uncle? We helped relatives and also foster parents sort of file really very necessary information with the court. It was eye opening, and it was a field I had never worked in before. But I just I wanted to take this degree. I have a dual degree and apply it to something meaningful. I wanted to make an impact, and I definitely did that. And I worked there for 4 to 5 years before, like many in that field, I sort of hit a wall and I burnt out. And that's when I reconsidered. Everything up until then had been so outwardly focused, right? Can I make something that inspires me so much that almost feels inwardly focused after working on like these big, huge world problems like global warming at the city level and green building, and then moving to, helping these children in foster care. And I had a lot of grappling with that. Can I make art meaningful in a way like all of my previous jobs? And that's when I took the plunge. I think I was around 38 or 39.
Wow. That's interesting, and I connected with you also at that event, the Hilda and Jesse event, because I think I don't listeners might not know, but I was a foster parent, and I thought that was so interesting that you were in that field, and I actually didn't even know that that type of law practice existed, like an advocate to help the judge get this information. I think
Yes.
it's so important because I know in my experience, I mean, I've only fostered two children. One is our daughter who we adopted, who came to our home when she was only 4 days old, and then her older brother who moved in with us when he was 14. But I can see that the importance of that step, because I think often the judge is just seeing this kid, and maybe the kid has had a lot of problems and maybe behavioral issues, but why does he have the behavioral issues? Obviously there are many reasons why, so so bless you for doing that work for as long as you could. I mean, I just can't imagine. I don't know if I have the stomach to ever to do any more fostering, because it's a very, very challenging. The whole world is very challenging. The whole world of foster care is very challenging. So,
It really is. And it was interesting because California actually has these wonderful laws. And it's why this nonprofit that I worked for, it was five female lawyers in one nonprofit. And they started, I think in the 80s, Jan and Margaret opened the business. And I had heard about them through another associate at my law firm, actually. She said, you wanted to work and help children. What if you just volunteered at this nonprofit? And I didn't know anything about it either. But California has these amazing laws where we can file. So if you think about it, who's actually in the courtroom with these children are, the social worker attorney, the biological parent attorney, it, you know, there's no one representing whoever is taking care of the child at that moment. There's not a legal entity in the courtroom. Like when you were a foster parent through all of your proceedings, you didn't have a lawyer that was bringing information to the judge about this moment, not what happened before.
Oh, that's
If
yes,
you,
that's
if
so
you
true.
think about just even that setup, right? And so this
Yeah.
nonprofit was created to utilize this just amazing California law. The forms are like, boring names like they always are, JV 290s and JV
Yeah.
180s. But you file the forms and the judge has that information. So I'm trying to think of a case I can speak of that's definitely closed. I mean, one time we had a grandma call us. We had a hotline. It's like legal aid. And she said, I just received all of these pictures of my 3 and 5 year old with live ammunition guns in the backyard while they're doing a parental visit. And I need the judge to know that this is going on. I've spoken with a social worker. No one, like, here are the pictures. And this is happening now. And we filed some paperwork with, and the judge was able to receive that really important information. And so it's the way I look at this is not normal things that happen within the foster care system. You call us, we're like the Ghostbusters. We were like the Ghostbusters. There's still Margaret and Jan and everyone is still there and they're still functioning. It's such a wonderful organization. But the things that you learn about that people do to children or that happen to children really, I was able to compartmentalize it for a while and then it started getting to me. And it was actually when I was pregnant with my third child that
Oh, wow.
it really started hitting me. And I thought, I wonder my longevity. Like the classic, you have to take care of the caretaker. Can I handle this enough to be of service in this field, right? I don't want to become jaded and not care and function like a robot throughout my day. I put so much love and energy and intention in that job, and I wasn't willing to do it without all of that.
That totally makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was hitting burnout. And that was, like I said, that was my third trimester. I think it was a week or two before I went into labor because he came a month early. Um, that I was really grappling, right? Like, and the organization is amazing. I still miss the women, but the work is just really taxing. And so I gave birth, and 3 months later, I thought, if I'm ever going to make this creative leap, if I'm ever just going to try this, like suddenly you hit, in your late 30s or early 40s, and you think, wow, time is finite.
Yeah.
Let's do this. Let's try it. And
Absolutely.
that was it. And I am thrilled and I'm really happy. And yeah,
That's amazing. And so you have 3 children.
I do. I have 3 children. Yeah.
That's very impressive. I can't imagine having to take care of more than 2, but um, was it challenging for you to start a whole new career basically while having 3 small children? I mean, obviously that's
It was.
yeah,
It
it's
was, right?
obviously a yes.
Right. And so the interesting thing is the longer that you stay out of law. So I did. I thought, you know what? Maybe I'll go back to the law that I went to, land use law or an environmental law. If I'm burnt out, I can pivot back to my old career. It had been 5 years since I practiced by then. And the law is constantly changing. So I'm still barred. Even now, I'm still barred to practice law. I'm just marked as an inactive attorney. Um,
Wow.
but at the time, it's interesting with law. I would have to have caught up with 4 to 5 years of legal changes within my field, which I could certainly do. And that crossed my mind. I guess what I'm trying to say is no matter what path I took, if I was burnt out on my current job, it was going to be hard, right? With 3 kids at home and just pivoting in some way. Yeah, I mean it's hard for all women, all mothers, or any breaks, right? I've even seen my husband finally with the third child, he took his full paternity leave, which was really lovely. And it was out here, I think it was 2 months. And he even reported, wow, 2 months. And I got to get back into the groove and go back to the office. And it's hard to take breaks.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so it was hard, but the other thing I want to say is this was a passion and it was hanging in the back of my head. I think if I look back at my life, I almost see that Robert Frost poem of like there's two paths way back in like 2000 that I could have taken, and I took one. And like, you just always wonder what would my life have looked like on that other path. But I did it because I did law school and getting a master's in planning because I wanted to be financially stable. That was very important to me. I wanted to be self-sufficient. And at that time, art was such an unknown. So I go and get my master's in fine arts. I get an MFA. Um, and how could I support myself? How could I? It was scary. And so I chose the mainstream track.
Yeah, yeah, that
And
makes
so
sense.
I think that, yes, going back and doing this over at 38 or 39 is scary. I also think, however, I had a financial foundation at that time. I think I'm more sure of myself. Think about all we learn in the decades that we spend on this earth. And my outlook on life in my late 30s and early 40s is completely different than my early 20s. It's now or never. Let's do this. I've done hard things. I can do this.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. The thing that I wonder about also, like talking about financial stability and having a family, um, it sounds like your husband works a job full time, and and what I wonder, just because this is I've struggled with this personally, is does your work ever get kind of put on the back burner, or do you have to work hard to make sure that doesn't happen? Because for me, I'm the default childcare person. I'm the default domestic person because my husband works full time and it's kind of an intense job. And like his job, whether I like it or not, is the one that pays the majority of the mortgage. So, so that's just how the balance happens. I just wonder, do you struggle with that at all?
Oh, 100%. I I mean, one of the reasons when I went back to my legal career that I chose a nonprofit, I had always been interested in nonprofit. In law school, I took nonprofit law to make sure that I understood that field. It's funny in law, you're supposed to, the recommended path is you start at a firm because then you learn your base skill set at that level of legal practice. And then, so even though I always had my eyes on nonprofit, I started at the firm. And I was really glad about that because actually the first couple of years, I was the primary breadwinner for a little bit until my husband got established out here in California. And now, ever since then, he has been. And 100%, even at the firm, after my first child, I was at 90% of my billable hours just so I could leave in time to pick her up from daycare. I mean, daycare hours and a commute are not friendly to mothers. I had to be in the office. I was working it would be like a normal full-time job, but at a firm, it was like 80 to 90% hours. I still worked like 50 or 60 hours a week. So
Wow.
that was a struggle for sure. And when we had our second child and we temporarily relocated to London for my husband's job, that was weighing on me. And I think as it's like a slow boil for moms. When I talk to other mothers, it's like we make these little micro decisions along the way. And that's how, I've always put my children at the forefront. And I've tried to really embrace where that took me in life, right? Because for a while at the very beginning, I was upset that it was always my career that was sidelined a little bit, right? How am I going to keep up with everybody um, while only working 90% billable hours? Is this even the partner track? Do I want the partner track? And now look at, here I am now. I mean, all these little micro decisions that I made have led me to a career that I'm absolutely in love with. But yes, juggling is always hard at every point. I feel like I diverged a little bit from your question there.
No, no, that's
Yeah.
I know I love what you're saying about the micro decisions. I never really thought about it that way, but I make all these little decisions to be the one. to pick her up, even if I feel like I'm pressed for time and I'm in the middle of something. Like I make the decision, well, it's my responsibility, so I'll do it. And then what happens for me is like I kind of explode and have some kind of like, why am I always the one? Can't you help me sometime? Like I have a little bit of an outburst, and yeah, maybe being a little bit more mindful about making those small decisions more friendly to my own time, to our own time, because I think a lot of us struggle with that. That might be helpful.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important conversation to have. So I always looked at my husband's calendar and it's so immovable, right? Because it's for his job and I started treating my calendar, and this is really when my art became a business. As a small business owner and an artist, you have got to create that boundary, that space, or else you'll never get off the ground. And I started filling in my calendar with things as simple as like today, my calendar says that after we get off of this wonderful interview, I need to trim. And it's like, it's a to do in my day. It doesn't need to be done from noon to 1 p.m., but it is in my calendar as this is what I'm doing. I break down my to do list by hour. And I know that sounds really crazy, but when I have 3 pickups and everything else, it holds myself accountable. It means it's a signal because we share calendars within the family that this is mom's job and this is what she will be doing at this time. And that's really when my studio time became a business and my precious time. And I'm still learning, but it was the first start of that boundary setting, that time where I'm worth it. I'm going all in. I'm going to try to make this business work. And therefore, this is important. I mean, that is good mothering, right? To show boundaries, to show these children that like what we do is important. We're important.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm still grappling with this, but this is where I'm at right now. And I know that's what got me where I am right now with my art because it's so easy to sideline a business that you're trying to create yourself. So easy.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I know that all too well, and because my daughter, a couple times in the last couple months has said things like that I don't really have a job, or that like I don't really work or make money, or like, daddy bought this house, or like, stuff like that. And I'm like, oh my God, like I need to change the way I'm presenting to her and probably the rest of the world, that I need to change that. It's not her fault that she believes that. I need to change the way that's perceived.
And it's hard, right? So one of the things I've started doing is, I think so. My children are ages 11, 9, and 4, and this is a little bit easier with the older children. I don't know how old your children are, but I've stopped making social media and articles as something that I only share with adults. I now bring my phone out or my computer out, and I'm like, "Hey, mommy, for her business, and I could see you with your article. This isn't a magazine. Mommy wrote it. Like, look at what mom did today." And I don't know that we're necessarily geared, or at least I'm not. My personality is not geared to do that at all for people. Like, that's just not, that doesn't come natural for me whatsoever. But I started having that same feeling that you're having where I'm like, this is incumbent upon me to show my children, like, not just with like, this is when mommy's working, but also like, this is what mommy does. Almost like, in more corporate America, we had your take your kids to work day.
Mhm.
I don't, yeah. And so I just, sometimes I have my children here with me in the studio working with clay and what a great thing to like show them this autonomous business that I'm created separate. So anyways, I don't know. I'm constantly still grappling with that, but um, instead of just keeping it all in my head and talking to adults about it, one of my big aha moments in the last year probably was I need to share my accomplishments with my children.
That is brilliant. I need to do that too. That is really, yeah. And I, thinking back, that sort of clicked with my older son. Um, when I showed him my website, he was like, "Oh, you made that?" Like, I never really occurred to me to be like, "Look, this is what I do." He was like kind of impressed, and I was like,
That's awesome.
and he's like, "Oh, you have almost as many Instagram followers as I do." Almost.
Almost.
but it was like, semi-impressed, so, yeah, it is important to, like and I think you're Gen Xer, right? You're Gen X. Was
79,
that
I think
yeah,
that makes me Gen X, yeah.
you're probably, like, on the younger side. I'm on the older side of Gen X. Um, but I feel like I don't know if you feel like this is true. Maybe it's just more true for the older Gen Xers, but that we don't toot our own horns very readily. Like, I feel like we didn't grow up with social media, so
Yeah,
being like, "Look what we're doing, like, look what I'm wearing, like, look at it." It's not natural.
it is not natural at all. And I grew up in the Midwest, which really emphasizes stoic, hardworking, like confident yet quiet about it people.
Yes.
I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is sort of like that stoic kind of silent, accomplishing person. I was at Californios and I was talking with Val, which is one of the chefs I work with, and we were planning an event, and we were like through 80% of the event because he's a little bit younger than me, but about like upper 30s, and we both looked at each other and we're like, oh, we should get a photographer. And he goes, yeah, because if we don't have a photographer, did it ever even happen?
Exactly.
Started laughing.
Exactly. It's like, at this point, it's almost like really all what you need is the photos. Like, the actual event is kind of less important than the photos.
Isn't that crazy? I know, but the other thing I really want to do is story tell with my art, right? So people find more meaning. They find more meaning when they know the backstory, how something was made, the collaboration involved with the two artists. And so, we laugh and we joke about the photos and all of that. But in the end, especially in this time where we're not physically together as much, even still after 2 years, I think that I've bought into the photos. I've bought into the videos. I've bought into the social media because it quite honestly is, and everything has a pro and a con and everything, I've heard a lot of grumblings that Instagram's getting too commercialized, and I get it and I hear it. Um, it's incumbent upon us to continue keeping it informative and meaningful and inspiring for people. But so I bought in. We got the photographer at the event.
That's good. That's
Yeah,
good. So you'll have the photos.
yeah.
But
So
I agree. I mean, I enjoy social media when it reveals something that when it suddenly reveals that, like, I'm not alone in something. Like, a lot of these like reels that people do where they're like there's the I don't remember his name, but he's so funny. He's a comedian, and he'll do something like there's one where he's making a restaurant reservation, and he's like so nervous to talk to the person on the phone, and I'm like, I get that way too. I get nervous that I'm gonna sound dumb, or like I'm gonna sound like I don't know I don't know how to make a simple reservation. Like that's like these sort of neuroses, like little neuroses that we all have, that you think you're the only one, but then you see something on a reel or something like that, and you're like, oh my God, other people feel that way too.
it's like
It cracks me up.
like what is life if not like the common human condition, right? Like calling up for reservations or yeah, being embarrassed in some situation completely, and then you don't feel so alone.
Yeah, totally. Like being an introvert. I was laughing. I got a little teary just now. um, but yeah. Anyway, yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about so what your collaborations that you do with the restaurants. I'm so curious to hear about how you approach those, because I feel like it could be, like I was saying, I'm envious of the collaborative nature of it. But also I wonder, how is it difficult ever to, like, do you to have to sort of like mold your creative vision to what they are looking for? Like, how does that work for you?
Absolutely. That's such a great question. So I would say, so when I first embarked upon this journey, I was very lucky because I cold called California's, which is one of my favorite restaurants at the time. And I happened to stumble upon a chef who truly sees plates as art and grew up in an art focused home and values local artists. And that set a lot of the tone of how I created my business because I had that support, this collaborative relationship that was so symbiotic, you know, constantly sketching out ideas. He would run down and bring up food. It really was like we made these plates together. And the final product isn't really there until he's putting the food on it. So
Oh,
I was
yeah.
very spoiled at the beginning. And one thing I've learned is to hang on. I'm very lucky to be in this position right now. 5 years ago, if you would have told me that I'm here, I almost cry wanting to tell you how happy I am. I would have never believed you that this is how this business was going to evolve, that there were that many and amazing quality creative chefs in the Bay Area, respectable, really into collaboration and so intentional in their food and their plating and their experience. I would have never imagined that this could be such a large part of my business. If you would have told me this 5 years ago, I would have laughed. I would have been like, right, right. And then where am I doing the retail mugs and everything that everybody else does, right? But somehow, word of mouth through relationships, I've just been really lucky to find these people that are just really wonderful to work with. Just really great. I think also a lot of it is expectation setting and sort of a lot of communication on the outset because I'm in this weird niche. I don't blame anyone who's confused about what I do, right? Like they're used to going on a website and they have the dishes already and then they go on a website and they pick the plates that would put their dishes, their plated food on, and it's just a complete, it's like think about it for like it would require reversing your mind completely to think about what would best hold my food rather than picking from, allotted options. And so I and so there's a lot of like communication at the onset to make sure that we're both on the same page. Because I'm doing this intentionally and we're meeting and we're designing together, this will take a while, right? That we're going to meet. I'm going to give you a prototype. I'm not going to start making the collection, the full set, until I know that you're happy with it. And we'll go back and forth. And then this has evolved into I found a chef like Kim Alter at Nightbird. So she actually has completely reversed. And this isn't due to me. She's worked with many artists, but we collaborate wonderfully together. But she's completely reverted her process where we actually just work on the plate and then she will find something to plate on it later. The plate
Oh my
inspires her to
wow,
create food. Like, think about how reversed that is. It's
that's
lovely.
amazing.
But I think also though, and I've made a lot of wonderful clay. It's like the Bay Area is rich in both artists and clay happens to be really hot. When I first started working in ceramics, it was not popular like 20 years ago, but it is really popular right now. It's a lot of ceramic artists and there's some really creative chefs. And so I live in this wonderful area of like a hotbed of creativity. But I've talked to other people in clay and they're like, I could never do what you're doing. Because, like you said, there's a hard part to it, right? You're surrendering some of your artistic process. But one thing I've learned, Kristen, is that surrender actually makes me and my personality at least better art, right? And so think about, so I've often thought about this like throughout. So when I first learned pottery at the production studio, I learned production throwing, and the whole purpose of production throwing on the wheel, making something over and over again, is a ruler is taken out, and if this face is exactly the same height as this face, as this face, as this face, I've done my objective. And if they're not, boom, and it's not the fault of my old boss. It's what everybody does. They're smashed right in front of my face, right?
Oh
There's an
my
eighth of an
god.
inch difference, and that is now not okay, and we're done. And there's a lot of things, and clay has so many stages. Like you could get something to the final stage. In fact, I'm waiting for this glaze firing to cool, and even after 20 years, I'm like, what will be in there? I think it'll be okay, but there's so much surrender in the clay process. There's surrender in the wheel. I took a class where my instructor said we could keep nothing we made. You just have to give it all back because the whole point was the process, just throwing over and over again to get what
Wow.
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's similarly, this is a long-winded story, but similarly, there is some surrender in the collaborative process, right? So I will never I will be honest with my chefs. This is the hard part of collaborating. I will be honest with my chefs when we get to a line where it no longer feels like my art or my work. If they ever bring me pictures, I will not create exactly what's in the picture. Let's talk it through a little bit. Let me explain a little bit about what I would do with this form and how I would make this slightly different, right? And I think a lot of communication on the onset and through the design process is how you end up knowing if this is a good relationship, if this works, and I actually almost every single one of my restaurants, one closed during pandemic, I still have as a client. Like it's just, and I think the feedback I've received is if they surrender a little bit, they also grow in their art form and the end result. And then I make a plate or a bowl or whatever I'm making, even a vase. I make a lot of vases as well. And they're still not done until I hand them over. So when you make functional objects, your art is never complete. You're handing it over to somebody else to fill with food or flowers. And there's some surrender in that as well. So I think, I'm not saying it's always easy to do that. Sometimes I look and I'm like, oh, am I okay with that color on there? But no, I am. I am. It's fine. Like it was, and I think, yeah, it's meaningful. So there has to be a part of you in this niche that I've created. There has to be a part of you that you're okay with that surrender. And I think that started at a really young age with my work at the pottery studio. The clay process taught me that, and I'm just taking it to the next level.
I think like isn't that true for so many things that if you can communicate, like communication is so important, but it's hard sometimes. Like you have it's a skill that you have to learn. I am terrible at communicating sometimes, like for example, with my husband, like I was saying earlier, like I don't communicate to him that like it annoyed me that I had to go pick up our child, even though, it can be hard to communicate, but it's so, like, worth it in the end if you can, like for me also, I'm sort of like a people pleaser, like, I don't wanna upset or annoy anyone, so I just keep it all in, I just am like, "I won't share that, I don't need to, let's just move on." So it's so important, I think, yeah, just in running a business, especially being a small business owner, working on your own, to be able to communicate with your clients slash collaborators is so important. And then the second part of that that really struck me is that um collaborating and like that surrender, it's just a process of learning, isn't it? Like it's like you're learning something by letting someone else into your process and seeing what you come up with.
Absolutely.
Because I think I don't know, sometimes I have this tendency to be like closed off and be like, I can just do it by myself. Like I'm just going to do it the way I want to do it. But then if I let someone into the process or if I work with someone else, I feel like I often, almost always, will get a better result or a more interesting result or a richer result.
Or sometimes you learn, yes, I feel like a lot of times, I think the majority of the time, I just like the end result better. I mean, and because they're going to use it, their input is, I've learned so much about the edge of pourers, like gravy and sauce pourers, how they have to be sharp, functional things, right? Like,
Yeah.
and of course I need that input. There's there are times also where I go through the process and I really give it space. I give someone's opinion space. I prototype it out, and then I envision myself people pleasing, meaning I am now going to make 20, 30, 40, 50 of that version of what they like better. And I think, wait a minute, I mean, ceramics is a tough thing on your body, and I am in my early 40s now. And what I've learned to do is to really be like, okay, Erin, you are now going to make that 40 times over the next, and the process lasts 6 weeks. I'm going to be like elbow deep in this design for a really long time. What do you really feel about it? And sometimes the process leads you back to where you were originally, that my way was really great, but you're actually able to communicate like why you think that this design, and could it still work with the food. And again, it's going back and sort of checking in and learning. I don't know if assertiveness is the right word, but learning to advocate for your intuitive idea. So that's like, 15% of the time. I think the majority of the time is the result is better because of the input of more than one person, quite honestly, because of the collaboration.
Yeah, and that, like you just explained, that doesn't mean that you completely give up your own vision. Like,
No,
you
no, not at all. Never.
yeah, you know yourself enough to, and I think you have to, like, it just actually reminded me of that book. Have you read, Blank by Malcolm Gladwell?
I have not read Blink, but I've heard of it.
It's an older one of his, and I don't remember it in great detail, but one of the things that really struck me was that once you get really good at something, you become sort of an expert in something, then you can have that blank response. You can be like, you know right away what's good, or you know right away what's gonna represent you well. When you're new at something, it's harder to do that. But now that you have this expertise, you can kind of, and maybe it always won't be like instantaneous, but you know what represents you, and you know what you believe is quality and good and what speaks to
Absolutely. But
you.
then also cribbing, like the step off of the Blink, is there are times where one of my friends, she's a local artist, her name is Wendy Chen. She talks about something called the beginner mind. And so when you're new to something, all possibilities are open and you approach it with such an open mind, right? And every once in a while, because I've been doing this for 20 years, my blink response, my opinion might be like, we don't do that in ceramics. So for example, when I was working with Val at Californios, I brought him two different blacks, right? And he's like, gosh, I really love both of these, but honestly, I think the mix of them would be gorgeous. And the best way to describe this is, let's say you have a banana bread recipe and like an olive oil grapefruit bread recipe. You don't like combine them, right? So I have a recipe for one black and I have a recipe for another black, and I don't actually combine them. That's just not something that we do in ceramics. Your recipe is, you could maybe stick with a core recipe and get inspired by the other recipe, but you wouldn't like literally combine them, right? Or you wouldn't make the batter of the banana bread and the batter of the grapefruit bread and then combine them together. Most likely you wouldn't, right? But that's exactly what I did. I said, okay, I'll mix up this black, I'll mix up this black. And I had to mess with ratios. It wasn't like 50-50. And I did all these test tiles. And sure enough, that is the black that I use. And had I used the blink response of, we don't do that in ceramics, so it's funny, right? It's like everything in life. Like, yes, my expertise, I can usually tell right away if a prototype, like, I'll definitely take it back. I'll have considerations. I'll play around with it, and I'll end up going different directions too. But I do have a pretty good intuition by now on what will work and what won't. But it's also keeping that fresh beginner mind of like, instead of just gut reaction, we don't do it that way. Maybe I'll try it and see what I was like. What is the worst that's going to happen? When I tested that out, that was at the very beginning of my collaborations. I said, I'm going to waste, like, with little test tiles, I'll waste 2 cups of glaze and I'll, do different ratios and I'll mark them on the test tile. We'll just see what we come up with. And sure enough, like, it's the black I use in almost all of my pieces. So
Oh, wow.
it was
That's
worth
really
it.
cool.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
know. I know. So it is sort of like, I know, I love that you brought that up. I think it's an interesting thing to think about, right? Like when do you use your expertise? When do you challenge it? When do you approach something with an open mind? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just this you mentioned Wendy, does she do, like, knots? Is she the
Yes.
knots? Yeah,
Yes.
I love
She's
her work.
wonderful. I
So
know.
amazing.
Gorgeous. She's lovely. She's a lovely person too. Very inspiring.
Nice.
Yeah, but I love hearing her describe, and it's really something I've heard only from her. The way she puts it, that beginner mind, when you approach something, because she too, this art is her second career in life, which is why, and there's a lot of us out there. And speaking of collaborating, it's not just with my clients, but I've also really worked hard to find other artists in both similar and different mediums that we can support each other. Like, I collaborate a lot with a painter named Jamie Lovejoy, and she used to be in marketing. And right around this age, she also decided to create an art business. Wendy used to own a record store, and now she's doing knots.
Oh, wow.
Oh
I
yeah,
didn't know that. I didn't know that. I have her book, Year of Knots?
Year of Knots. Yes, she used to own
Yeah.
Aquarius Records.
She did? I did not
Yes.
know that. Oh my
Yeah.
god. The one on, Valencia.
Yes, on Valencia Street. That was hers. She used
That's
to
so
work she worked there and then she bought it. And so there's so many of us
really
that are
cool.
I know, isn't that cool? And it's
Yeah.
like we're all like cats with 9 lives or like I just find that whole process it's like, everyone always talks about it like a midlife crisis. But what if
Yeah.
it's just what if we there and there's definitely a brain development and psychological phenomena that happens in these mid years, whenever that hits whoever it is, and whether it's in the 40s or the 50s. Um, but what if we start calling it something a little bit different, like this, like midlife enlightenment or a rebirth, or like like what is this? Why don't we see the good qualities of regeneration? Like reinventing yourself. I see a lot of people go through it, and I think it has a really special moment in time.
It's funny you mentioned that because I don't know if you've seen this book that was recently published called The Upgrade.
No. Well, now I
Yeah,
need to write it down.
yeah. The author's name is Luann Brizendine. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but she also wrote a book called it's either called The Feminine Mind or The Female Brain, I think is what it's called. And I think that was a very big book like several years ago. And now she's written this book, The Upgrade, and it's exactly what you just said. It's the whole idea. The cool thing is that it has scientific like evidence backing everything you just said, that like when we go through midlife, we actually improve in all these ways that no one has really talked about before because everybody's like too busy making fun of menopause or like, making it into a joke or whatever. But actually, like if I could find, I actually have a document I wrote down. Okay, this is a quote that she says in the book. You need to realize how much power you hold to shape the second half of your life. This is the time for creating the map for women in the post fertile, post reproductive phase of human development. The second half of a woman's life is a revelation.
I love that. I am going to read this book.
I just got it. She mailed it. And she's going to be on my podcast.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait to hear. Oh, I love this. Okay, so I'm going to and this is so the only reason I brought it up, quite honestly, is my therapist said that there is a real lack. We have like the baby in the crib and a lot of like early brain development research and brain development, like even popular science books. And she's sort of hoping that soon there will be more conversation, more popular science books, more even research on the actual change in our brains during this midlife, and that it's a revelation, right? And something really big hit me that actually connects with your previous question just now when you said that quote. When I spent a few years being in more of an angry or resentful position about me always being the one that's called from school, always the front parent. And I've been really working hard for a few years now on deciding that was a chapter where I devoted so much. My kids they're getting out of that early years, a little bit more independent, right? And when you hit that, they're 4, 9, and 11. The 4-year-old we're still getting there, but definitely at 9 and 11, that's the time to start focusing on you again, really, and getting out of that mom brain fog, which is real. And actually, like, we make fun of it in society, but I just saw there was something on Instagram that I just saw that was really lovely. I think it was an Atlantic article about this, which is, that's actually true. Like the multitasking we ask women to do in the society right now is actual real toxic stress. And it's
Oh yeah, I
equivalent,
think I saw that too.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's equivalent to like a burnout.
Yeah.
Like we all accept male burnout at jobs or female burnout at like workplaces, but this is happening for women just because of our multitasking with both childcare and work. But so much of life is perspective. So how can I shift that perspective now? Okay, anger in some way is powerful because it's like a reaction to an injustice as long as you react in a really good way. But I've been thinking through this, like that's that chapter. And now midlife is power, right? It's a revelation. It is taking that time. What did you learn about sidelining your self-care, your needs, right? Putting them to the back burner in this finite space of when children need you most. And how can you then use it? Because I almost feel like when I started my art business, that because I had been held back for so long from doing it, that it was bursting out of me. And sort of like this quote that you're saying from her book, it's like all that energy, all the things that we've learned up to this point can be used in such a positive way at the midlife stage. I love it. I can't wait to read that book.
Yeah, I can't wait either. I just got it in the mail a couple days ago, and I'm gonna dive in.
This is why I love what we're doing right now is we need to be
Yeah,
talking about it more, right?
absolutely.
There's
Yes.
so much
Yeah.
so much on early motherhood and not not as much as there should be on this stage that I'm entering and yeah.
That's so true. I mean, it's so true for so many things with youth. Like you learn all about pregnancy and childbirth, and like there's so much written about that, and child care and child rearing and parenting, and then you know, when you go through puberty, I couldn't remember the
Yeah.
word puberty. You know, like there's a lot about that, like hormones, when it comes to puberty and everything that. But then when it comes to the hormonal change that happens, like perimenopause and menopause, there's not that much. Like it's a mystery. I mean, I didn't even know. I very certainly went through perimenopause, but didn't even know what it was. Honestly, I didn't even know it existed. I hadn't heard the word perimenopause until I was already, I think, menopausal. So it's like,
No, and
why?
don't you just wanna, like, take a sledgehammer to that and just, like, throw that all like, let's talk about it. Let's
Yes.
and think about what we're going through and the age of our children. So for me, I'm gonna hit I have a few older friends with children that are in high school because, my eldest is 11 right now. And I think if you think about the timing in life, perimenopause and maybe even menopause occurs right when you have children, when mother support groups sort of, we have so many mother support groups for early childhood and birth and like it's so and I love that and I'm so glad we have that. I just want to replicate it for one of my friends was like we created a baby group and she's like, all right, we're probably all going to go silent for about 4 or 5 years. But the minute I hit middle school, I'm going to resurrect this Facebook group. And she just did. She renamed
Oh
it.
my god.
And she's like, my child will not talk to me. My child is angry at me all the time. Let's start talking about it. And I'm in perimenopause, by the way. Let's go.
Lots to talk about. Let's go.
I was like, whoa, you're right. Colliding of two really monumental times, like puberty and the parent is going through these changes that we don't discuss enough. Absolutely. I'm on board. Let's talk about it more.
I love it. Good for her. Yeah, we definitely need more groups like that and more people to start the groups like her. That's amazing.
I was like, how did you even find this? This is like buried in my Facebook groups. So many have, been opened and occurred since then. But
Yes. I want to ask you just one more thing about your art, and um, I'd just like to ask, like, how would you describe your aesthetic? Where do you get your inspiration, and I guess just yeah, how would you describe how like the look of what you create?
that's a really great question. So because I went from mugs, I've always been in the functional art realm. And because I went from mugs to creating gorgeous art for restaurants, there is always a tactile nature. And honestly, throwing on the wheel, even trimming what I'm going to do when we're done here is very meditative for me. And it's always hands touching, right? The creating of the art is tactile. And so when I started working with restaurants, I wanted people to do what I do at fine dining restaurants, which is after I'm done, my husband starts the countdown 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and Erin's picking up the plate. I'm turning it over. I'm feeling it. So I would say that one of the inspirations for my art is to create art that people want to touch. They want to take in with their eyes, with their hands. It's holding something that smells gorgeous and delicious. It's a full sensory live gallery experience, right? I want something that makes people slow down. When we go to restaurants, we gather, right? We gather together. It's usually, especially fine dining, multi-course restaurants, we're not doing that every week. That's something very special. And I want time to slow down in this fast-paced world where people just sort of like pause to notice something. And hopefully the art, the collaborative art speaks to them. So my style is, I would say, very textural, very representative of what the dish is actually holding, because I've started at the beginning of my design phase thinking about what it would hold. It's a very different process than creating something to give to someone who then decides what they're going to put in it. It's intertwined at the very beginning of the process. So boy, succinctly, very textural. It invites people to touch it. Very organic and flowy, and has movement. And most importantly, not carbon copies. Something that little touch of handmade, that eighth of an inch that's different. Maybe the width of the glaze varies by an eighth of an inch on otherwise bare clay. That will catch your eye. If everything's uniform, our eyes just sort of, maybe don't notice it as much. And so,
Yeah.
I'd say handmade, intentional, tactile, organic. I want my end product to show the process that I've gone through, the work, the design.
Yeah, and I think you definitely succeed because I that just brings me back to Hilda and Jesse. Wait, am I saying it wrong? Hilda and Jesse.
Yeah, you're right. Helene and Jesse. Yeah.
Just when I walked in and saw all of your mugs on the table and those colors, I've never seen ceramics in those colors before.
Right?
Oh my god, and I was just like and then when they said that we could take one home, I was like so thrilled. I was so excited. And I really didn't care which one. I was like, just anyone, because they're all gorgeous and amazing. Like, whatever one I get, I'll be thrilled with. Although I think there was like a dark and a lighter one, and I did want the darker one. But like as far as what the way the glaze appeared and the colors, I was like, it's all just amazing, and you can tell it's organic. So whatever way any one of those mugs ended up, I'm, like, happy to drink my coffee out of it in the morning, you
Yeah.
know?
Oh, that makes
You
me so
every day.
happy. Yeah, and again, back to the collaboration, when I worked with Christina and Rachel, the owners of Hilda and Jesse, they really, every part of that experience, from the mural, that's a local artist named Maya, right? Naz Nazawa did the design. Whenever I spoke with the other artists involved, 22 did the mural in the bathroom. Talk about a dream collaborative team. Rachel and Christina always had their say, and then in the end, it was like, you do what you do because you're an artist. And that actually opened the door. I had never combined those colors before at all. And in fact, I was so deep in it at one point, Kristen, that I remember I stepped back and I was like, this is crazy. Like, this is like pink and yellow and red on like my black. Is it so crazy it's ugly, or is it so crazy it's beautiful? And I actually some self-doubt for a second, and then when I brought it to the restaurant and it was in the environment, it was really clear that it was a moment that I was pushed in a really beautiful direction, just by the openness of their faith in me. And that's what's so great about collaboration, really.
Yeah. Oh, that's so great. I love hearing that it all just was such a positive experience, and they seem so great. And the funny thing is I moved to Santa Rosa a year ago, and, our neighbor is a chef and a baker. They're a couple, and they, like, know them, and then so we had this whole conversation. Like, there was just so many small world things that happened at that brunch that,
I love it.
I knew good things were gonna come out of it. Including I'm so happy this interview came out of it.
Oh, I am too. This is so great. In fact, I wanted to speak with you more. I was like,
Okay.
trying to remember everybody's names, and I was like, I spoke with Kristen about the foster care, and we just really, because sometimes at those events get to the next level of conversation. It's
Yeah,
you
it's
know, and you
hard.
really
Yeah.
did. And that's part of the whole point, right? And so I'm glad that you had me on here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time. I know how precious your time is, so I really do appreciate it. It's been such a great conversation.
Time well spent.
All right, take care.
Okay, bye, Kristen. Thank you for having me.
Bye.